Hello, my friend. Today, I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. Deep in the waning light of the Third Age, whispers stirred among the peoples of Middle-earth. From the dark lands of Mordor to the ancient woodlands of Lorien, an uneasy quiet held sway. But this calm was illusory, like a breath held before a storm. In Rivendell, at the Council of Elend, concern bristled in every voice. Rumors had reached the wise elf lords and the Astair that Sauron, long hidden, was gathering strength once more. Scouts brought word. The Black Land's darkness crept outward, and most disquing of all, the Palantiri had fallen silent, as though in dread. Amid these omens, Gandalf the Grey felt a stirring in his heart. He had felt the faintest echo of the One Ring's call, an agony of loss, as if the ring sensed eyes watching and hands reaching. Such a stirring could not be ignored. If Sauron moved to reclaim the ring, time was short. And yet, its hiding place remained unknown. As Gandalf pondered this, a message arrived from Lothlorien, borne by swift horses of Lorien's border rangers. Galadriel, Lady of Light, sent word. A darkness stirs in Dolor. Come swiftly, Gandalf, for the fate of all depends upon the vigil. Her voice, even in writing, shimmered like silver light in twilight. Thus, in the last golden days of summer, Gandalf set out alone for Mirkwood's leafy highways. He rode through sun-dappled trails, warning birdsong echoed overhead, and branches rustled with watchful life. He thought often of the company that would trouble his mind deeply in mere months. Hobbits, elves, dwarves, men. But that was yet to come. Now there was this new threat, another hand at work in Dol Guldur, awakening old evils. In Lothlorien, the realm of Lady Galadriel, the air itself glowed with quiet power. Silver lights drifted in the trees. The river's voice was soft lullaby. Galadriel stood on the golden balcony of Saruman, watching the skies fading blue. Her hair gleamed like a pool of stars. Yet beneath her calm eyes lay worry for her forest and for Middle-earth. When Gandalf arrived, the lady greeted him with a gentle inclination of her head and a sad smile. "The time is upon us, Smith," she said, using the secret elfish name the Ari seldom heard. Something wicked stirs beneath the ruins of the old fortress. They spoke in the twilight garden, where golden leaves drifted like snow in an autumn breeze. Galadriel told of strange tremors felt in the earth near Dol Guldur. Runes twisted in the deep ruins, as though Sauron's servants had been chanting long and fell. And there were shadows seen, figures moving at the edge of torchlight, a shape so tall it seemed to blot the sky, and its eyes burned with unholy fire. And Alf nodded gravely. "The Dark Lord tests our vigilance," he said. "But it may be more than a resurgence of orcs and Nazgûl. There is mention, silent mention, that something older stirs. A Maia bound long ago has awakened in the bowels of that fortress." "A Maia?" Galadriel asked, her voice low. "One of the Aor twisted by Sauron's sorcery that you should name fills me with dread." He met her gaze. "Yes, I have felt whispers in the west. A voice that is not Sauron's, but lies beneath him. If this Maia regains form, Dol Guldur would become an umbrel, and Mordor would grow yet stronger in the quiet." Galadriel closed her eyes. A long moment passed where wind sighed through silver leaves. Then she opened them, pale as stars at dusk. "We must act swiftly, even united with the White Council. We may not tame this in time, but perhaps we do not act alone." Thus they resolved. Beneath the canopy of silent mallor trees, they would venture together. Gandalf, bearer of Nerea, the Ring of Fire, and Galadriel with Na, the Ring of Water. Neither had come to battle in this era, yet neither had faced such a foe. It was unthinkable that the Lady of Lorien should leave her realm, but the shadow at Dol Guldur demanded it. Their hearts were steady as they prepared for the journey. Galadriel drew from her realm stores a cloak of moonlight for Gandalf, swift horses of Lorien for their secret flight, and food that would not spoil laid in wicker baskets. She also gave him a small crystal phial filled with dew gathered in moonlight, a gift to ward against darkness and to light the way in dank halls. Gandalf, in return, offered counsel and his staff, and a promise. If the darkness grew too great, he would summon the council, but until then, secrecy was their shield. They left Lorien as dusk deepened, moving lightly beneath healed silences and cautious stars. The river's voice trailed them like an old lullaby, bidding safe travel. Ahead lay Mirkwood's southern edge, then the ruin of Dol Guldur in the valley, hidden beneath hill and wood. There they would begin their quest. Thus ends our first chapter. Gandalf and Galadriel ride from the light of Lorien toward the encroaching shadow of Dol Guldur, resolved to uncover and face the darkness within. The conflict has been set. An ancient Maia, bound and twisted by Sauron, stirs in the fortress. Their mission to enter his realm carefully and confront the looming horror before it gains strength. The road to Dol Guldur was shrouded in silence, though the summer sun still touched the high boughs of Mirkwood. The shadows beneath the trees deepened unnaturally as Gandalf and Galadriel pressed southward. No birds sang. The wind itself seemed to shy from the path ahead. Their steeds, though swift inshore, grew uneasy as they neared the heart of the forest, where the trees crowded close and the air thickened with unseen menace. Galadriel moved with an unearthly grace, her presence casting a soft glow in the gloom. The power of Maia was upon her, veiled yet ever present, and her very steps left no trace upon the mossy earth. Gandalf, tall and solemn beneath his gray cloak, leaned on his staff as they passed beneath twisted branches. His eyes, bright and searching, scanned the darkness for signs: crushed leaves, broken limbs, unnatural silence. The deeper they went, the more he felt it. A watchful presence, ancient and cruel, lying in wait. They made camp one evening by a stream that barely trickled, the water sluggish and tinged faintly with green. Galadriel sat in stillness, eyes half closed, her hand hovering just above the water's surface. "It is tainted," she said quietly as Gandalf knelt beside her. "The land resists healing. The corruption seeps outward from Dol Guldur like ink in clear water." Gandalf nodded, his expression grave. "The ring with the defiled much in their time here, but this feels older. I fear that something was buried beneath the fortress long ago, something that should have remained asleep." At dawn they continued without rest. The land darkened by degrees. Even Galadriel's light seemed dulled beneath the oppressive boughs. Strange mists curled around their horses' hooves, and low, whispering voices began to echo faintly between the trunks. Once they came upon a tree split clean down the middle, its blackened heart still smoking. Neither spoke, but they pressed on faster now. By the 5th day, the ruins of Dol Guldur rose before them, black against a blood-cold sky. The fortress stood like a broken claw upon the hill, its towers crumbling, its gates long sundered. Yet smoke drifted from unseen chimneys, and light flickered in the depths of the keep. Evil still dwelled there. They dismounted in the gully below, where the roots of the hill tangled in a great knot of stone and thorn. Gandalf whispered words of concealment, and a shimmer passed over them. Then, with a steadying breath, they began the climb. The ruins groaned with memory. Broken stone steps led into narrow passages where darkness thickened like tar. Galadriel moved ahead, one hand upon the wall, her other holding aloft the crystal phial. A soft silver light spilled from it, pushing back the gloom. Gandalf followed close, staff ready, muttering under his breath spells of warding and light. They passed ancient halls, some filled with rubble, others eerily intact. In one, a circle of rusted iron chains lay coiled on the floor, still steaming with some unseen heat. In another, a shattered mirror reflected no image at all. But it was in the lower chambers, beneath the keep, that they felt its strongest. The pulse of something vast and malevolent, echoing beneath the stone. Suddenly, a cry rang out. Not human, but high and thin, like metal, screaming against stone. Galadriel froze. Gandalf reached out, touching her arm. "He knows," she whispered. A great shudder passed through the ground. Dust fell from the vated ceilings. Far below, something moved. They found the stair that led down into the catacombs, its steps carved long ago and worn smooth. The descent was steep, the air foul and hot. When they reached the bottom, they entered a vast hall, once a throne room perhaps, or a temple. At its center stood a black altar surrounded by runes that glowed faintly red, and above it loomed a shape. It was not fully formed. Its body shimmered with heat and shadow, but it had a face, pale and cruel, with eyes like molten silver. Its voice came not from its mouth, but from all directions at once. "You should not have come," it said. Galadriel stepped forward, raising the light of her phial. "Who are you, Shadow?" she demanded. "What name did you bear before you fell into darkness?" The being laughed, a hollow, rattling sound. "I have worn many names. In the west I was called Kurumo. In the east they knew me as Setatar. Now I am called Mormachar, the Black Forged. Sauron gave me form anew." Gandalf's heart sank. This was no lesser spirit. This Maia had once served the Valar, had perhaps stood beside Ai in the shaping of the world. Now it had been reforged, a thing of spite and pain. "You were lost," Gandalf said quietly, cast down in the wars of the First Age. "And now I rise," the voice answered. "My chains have broken. The Dark Lord calls, and I obey." The altar flared. Red light surged outward, and the chambers shook. Stones cracked and fire licked the walls. Galadriel raised her voice in song, high and strong. And the light of Maia blazed like morning sun. The shadow recoiled, shrieking. But it was not destroyed. It would not fall so easily. "Come," Gandalf said, gripping her arm. "We are not ready, not here." And they fled up the stairs as the fortress roared behind them, chased by laughter and flame. Smoke billowed, and the ruins seemed to shift beneath their feet, as though the hill itself were awakening. They emerged into the cold night air, breathless and shaken. The sky above was torn with red lightning. Dol Guldur would not let them go easily, yet they had learned what they needed. A Maia had been awakened, one twisted by Sauron and bound to his will, a servant not yet fully risen, but rising fast. They would have to act swiftly, and not alone. By morning, the hill of Dol Guldur lay quiet once more, shrouded in an unnatural fog that clung low to the earth. The fortress loomed above like the ribcage of some fallen beast, smoldering faintly beneath the stone. Gandalf and Galadriel had withdrawn to the roots of the hill, hidden beneath the rocky overhang where the air was cleaner and no eyes watched. Though they had escaped with their lives, the weight of what they had seen pressed heavily upon them both. Gandalf sat on a flat stone, pipe clenched between his teeth, though unlit, staring into the shadows of the wood. His gray robes were scorched at the hem, and a thin line of blood traced down his wrist where a shard of falling stone had grazed him. Galadriel knelt beside the stream, washing her hands in silence. The phial of light had grown dim overnight, as though even its purity had been stained by what they had witnessed. "There is no more doubt," Gandalf said at last. "He is returning to Dol Guldur. Not Sauron himself, no, but one of his lost servants called back from Shadow. A Maia, broken and reforged. That presence we felt. It was not merely darkness. It was will, purpose, and it will not wait much longer." Galadriel stood and turned to him, her face pale in the gray light. "He is shaping a vessel," she said, "building a form for war. When it is complete, he will not remain in the ruins. He will spread like a fire beneath dry leaves until all the southern wood is lost, and with it the balance of power in the north." Gandalf added, "Ara, Dale, even Lothlorien would be threatened, and Rohan is far too near." They both knew the time for secrecy had ended. Whatever Sauron planned, it could not be stopped by two alone. They would need allies, those of power and wisdom, and courage besides. The White Council must be summoned. That very day they turned north once more, leaving behind the black hill that watched in silence. They rode swiftly through Mirkwood, taking paths known only to the eldest elves, and by the time they reached the borders of Thranduil's realm, word had already been sent ahead. Elves met them at the edge of the trees with silent bows and worried eyes, leading them into the halls beneath the forest. There, beneath root and stone, Gandalf called upon Radagast, sending messages to Imladras and to the Grey Havens. Galadriel summoned Eland and Caerdon, and even Saruman was bidden, though it had been long since he had answered a summons not of his own choosing. It was weeks before all were gathered, and in that time the air across Middle-earth grew restless. In Gondor, the beacons flickered without cause. In Rohan, horses whinnied in the night and would not be calmed. And in Lothlorien, the leaves began to fall before their time, drifting gold across the forest floor, as though mourning some unseen fate. When the council at last met, it was in a chamber of pale stone, lit by high windows and guarded by silence. Elrond sat tall and grave beside Galadriel. Caerdon, old as the seas, listened with eyes that saw more than any would guess. Radagast, ever gentle, brought word of twisted creatures seen in the southern woods, birds that flew in strange circles, deer with black eyes, and Sauron came at last, his robes white as snow, but his expression closed and unreadable.
Gandalf spoke first, laying bare all they had seen of the shadow in the ruins carved with ancient spells of awakening. The Maia, once of the West, now calling itself Mormachar, the Black Forge. At first, there was disbelief. Elrond frowned, his brows drawn tight. A Maia, not one of the nine. This is no lesser servant. Then such a being has not been loosed in the world since the fall of Angband.
It is true, Galadriel said. We faced him and barely escaped with our lives. He is not whole yet, but he will be. Sauron has bound his will to this one, as he once bound it to the Witch King. Radagast shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting in his lap. And the forest suffers. The animals flee. The roots rot beneath the earth. If Dol Guldur becomes his stronghold once more, the balance of the land will tip. Even Fangorn might not be safe. Saruman said nothing for a long while. He stared at the table, fingers steepled, then finally spoke. This Maia, this Mormachar, if he is not yet fully risen, then we may strike while he is still vulnerable. But to do so would be perilous. We would need force more than words and light. We would need war. Gandalf looked at him. Not war, precision, a blade driven to the heart. The fortress is not yet fully armed. If we strike before the dark power stabilizes, we can cast him down before he walks free. Then we must go quickly, Elrond said, before Sauron sees our hand. So it was agreed the White Council would move, not in force, but in secrecy. Elven archers from Lothlorien, wizards bearing relics of the West, even some dwarves from the Iron Hills who had old debts to pay. The assault would be swift, the blow final. But Saruman lingered after the council had ended. He walked alone through the quiet stone halls, his steps slow behind his calm face. Thoughts churned. A Maia reborn, power reforged, and Sauron shaping new servants not by dominion alone, but by craft. There was more at work here than had been spoken aloud. Still, the council had made its choice. The date was set, the scouts dispatched, and the plan put in motion. In the heart of Mirkwood, darkness thickened. Mormar, the Black Forged, labored in shadow, his form growing clearer with each passing day. The fortress thrummed with fell energy, and whispers echoed in the dark. Spiders crawled from deep holes. Beasts with many eyes slunk from crevices, and wraiths danced like smoke above forgotten tombs. Yet above all, the Maia watched. He knew they were coming, and he was ready. The moon was thin as a blade. When the host of the White Council began to gather, they came not in fanfare or bright banners, but in silence and secrecy, threading through the eaves of Mirkwood like a tide of quiet resolve. Elves of Lothlorien led the way, tall, grim archers clad in leaf-decked cloaks, their bows strung with silver-threaded sinew. From the Iron Hills came a small band of dwarves, broad-shouldered and silent, bearing axes that had tasted orc blood many times before. And among them moved the wise, Galadriel and Gandalf, of course, and Radagast with his staff bound in vines, his cloak stained with moss and bark. Even Saruman had come, though none could say whether his heart moved with the rest. They made their camp beneath a canopy of ancient trees, 3 leagues from the hill of Dol Guldur. The air there was heavy and bitter, as if the forest itself choked on what grew at its heart. Scouts returned each night with news of growing unrest. Pale fires danced on the ramparts. Strange lights flared in the sky above. And most disturbing of all, no birds had flown near the hill for 3 days. Not a cry, not a flutter. The skies were as still as the tomb. Gandalf stood apart from the others that final night, his staff planted in the earth, and his gaze fixed to the distant hill. He had not spoken much since the council's decision, but now his voice was steady when he addressed Galadriel beside him.
We must strike at dawn. If we wait any longer, we may find the thing we face no longer bound to the walls of Dol Guldur. We have this one chance before the Maia finds full form, before his will breaks its final chain. Galadriel nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. The silver circlet at her brow caught the moonlight, and her voice was soft when she replied. He senses us already. The trees groan in their roots, and the earth trembles. He is watching, though he cannot see us clearly. When the sun rises, his attention will fall sharp and swift, and we must be sharper, said Gandalf. At dawn, the council moved 100 strong, no more. The elves advanced in silence, melting into the undergrowth and taking positions on the outer slopes of the hill. The dwarves approached from the east, where the stone had crumbled and opened a breach in the fortress wall. The wizards would go through the gate itself, bold and direct, drawing the eye and the wrath of the one who ruled within. The attack began not with a cry, but with light. Galadriel raised her hand, and from her palm burst a radiant white that drove back the gloom like a star fallen to earth. At the same time, Gandalf struck the gate with his staff, sending a blast of force through iron and oak. The doors shuttered and splintered, and through them strode the gray and the white side by side. Behind them came Radagast, vines twisting from his sleeves as if alive. The halls of Dol Guldur were darker than night, the air wryer of ash and iron, and the walls pulsed with heat. Shapes moved in the shadows, creatures half-formed and flickering like phantoms torn from nightmare. The elves loosed arrows tipped with starlight, and the beasts shrieked and fell, bursting into flame or vanishing in smoke. The dwarves roared as they joined the fray, axes ringing against twisted armor. It was chaos. Yet within that chaos moved the council, their path steady, their eyes set on the tower's heart. They fought through 3 levels of the fortress, and still the darkness deepened. At last they came to the great hall beneath the central spire, where columns of black stone rose like petrified trees. In the floor glowed with runes too ancient to name. There, in the heart of Dol Guldur, stood Mormachar. He was no longer formless. His body had shaped itself in flame and iron. Armor black as obsidian clung to him like skin, and his face, though still shifting at the edges, was clear enough to show a cruel smile. His eyes burned white. His voice, when it came, echoed like thunder over bone. "Soon the council comes at last," he said. "Fools, you have arrived only to witness the dawn of a new power." Gandalf stepped forward, his staff ablaze with fire. "You have no power but what was stolen and twisted. You are nothing but a shadow cast by a darker flame." Mormachar laughed, and the runes across the chamber blazed red. "I was Maia long before you, Grey Pilgrim. I shaped the deep fires of the world when your kind wandered the west in ignorance. I am reforged, and I shall not be unmade by old words and fading light." With that, he raised his hand, and the room was filled with fire.
Galadriel answered with light so pure it burned without heat, and for a moment the flames faltered. Gandalf struck with his staff, sending bolts of power like lightning across the stone. Radagast unleashed roots that tore through the floor, binding Mormachar's limbs. The battle was joined.
The Fairs. It was not a battle of steel and blade, but of will and power, light against shadow, memory against despair. The fortress shook with a clash. Columns crumbled, walls split. The very hill groaned as if in pain. Saruman entered the chamber last, and for a breath the Maia's gaze turned upon him with a flicker of recognition. "You," said Mormar. "I know you. The clever one, the builder. You could have stood beside me." Saruman said nothing, but his staff remained still, his eyes unreadable. It was Gandalf who moved, striking again, pressing forward with a force born not of pride, but of urgency. Mormar reeled, and Galadriel's light surged, bathing the chamber in silver. The dark Maia screamed. Then came a burst like the world cracking, and all was still. When the dust cleared, the great hall was broken and half buried. Mormachar had vanished, leaving only scorched stone and the scent of something very old and very wrong. The council stood, shaken but alive. They had not destroyed him, not fully, but they had broken his vessel, scattered his forming power, and forced his retreat. Dol Guldur was silent once more. The fortress of Dol Guldur stood hollow and broken. Its towers, once jagged like black spears piercing the sky, now crumbled beneath the weight of battle and flame. The eastern wall had collapsed into a smoking heap of stone and ash. Fire still smoldered in the lower halls, and from the high keep where Mormachar had vanished, a faint, bitter wind spilled forth, whispering words none dared to translate. Gandalf walked slowly across the ruined hall, his staff clicking against cracked flagstones as he moved among the debris. He had taken no wounds, yet his limbs were heavy, and the light behind his eyes flickered dimly, like a hearth grown low. Beside him, Galadriel moved with quiet purpose, her gown trailing ash, her expression distant. She was listening, feeling the tremors left in the weave of the world, her power still drawn tight like a bow ring, alert for danger that might yet linger. Radagast had gone to tend the wounded, murmuring soft enchantments over fallen elves and dwarves alike. A dozen had died in the battle, perhaps more, struck down by wild flame, buried beneath collapsing stone, or torn by the twisted creatures that had guarded the Maia's stronghold. The rest worked silently to carry out the dead and douse the fires. The council's victory was real, but it had come at a price. Saruman had vanished the moment the chamber fell quiet. No one had seen him retreat, but neither was he missed. His presence in the battle had been like a shadow half cast, his staff unmoved until the end. Gandalf had noticed, of course, but there were other matters to tend before questions could be asked. By midday, the wounded had been gathered and the dead laid out beneath black cloth, their names spoken softly by comrades who knew them best. Galadriel stood over them with hands raised, and her voice, calm, solemn, sang the ancient words of parting. The trees overhead shivered, though no wind blew, and the ash lifted gently from the earth, scattering like snow. Later, in the upper chamber, where once a throne had stood, the remaining members of the council convened. The room was cold, despite the broken windows, and the walls bore the scars of battle. Great gouges carved by magic and scorched marks that still pulsed faintly with heat.
"We did not destroy him," Elrond said, his voice measured but grim. "We scattered his form. We disrupted the shaping of his vessel. But the Maia himself still exists. His spirit lingers." Galadriel nodded. I felt him recoil. "Yes, and flee. But he has not been unmade. He may be years re-weathering strength, or only weeks. The fortress is broken, but the land itself is wounded. If we leave it untended, the shadow will rise again." Radagast leaned forward, his brown eyes thoughtful. "The roots are still poisoned. I saw it in the ground outside. The soil is black, brittle. The trees speak of pain. This place will not heal quickly." "And yet we cannot remain here," said Gandalf. "We are not builders of strongholds. Our work lies elsewhere. The enemy watches from Mordor still, and his gaze will turn here again soon enough. If he senses weakness, he will return, perhaps with new servants." A silence followed. The weight of it hung heavy, as if even the walls listened. At last Galadriel broke it. "Then we must leave, Guardians. Watchers of the wood. Lorien will station a garrison at the river's edge. The borders will be closed. Nothing shall pass unseen." "I will send word to Thranduil," said Eland. "The elves of the north will not wish to see Mirkwood lost. Between his folk and yours, a cordon may be held." Radagast stroked his beard. "I will remain in the forest for a time to guide the healing. Birds and beasts will return if the darkness does not." "And what of you?" Elrond turned to Gandalf. "Will ye not remain?" Gandalf's eyes were tired, but firm. "No, my road leads west for now. There are signs and stirrings I must heed. We won a victory here, but the true war lies ahead." This was a prelude. Though none spoke it aloud, they all knew what he meant. The ring, the one ring still lost in the wilds, and Sauron, not yet revealed in full, biding his time in Mordor. The events at Dol Guldur were but a shadow of the storm to come. That evening, beneath a dusk sky painted in red and violet, the council parted ways. The wounded were borne east to recover in elven care. The dead were given rites and laid to rest beneath a grove of ancient trees, their names etched in stone. Galadriel remained for a time, speaking softly to the forest, calling what light remained into the roots and branches. Saruman had not returned. Gora was not happy, but she was not happy to hurt her family anymore. Gandalf rode west with only a single elven scout as escort, his thoughts heavy. He said little on the journey, save when they paused for rest, and then only to murmur about dreams. He had seen a land of ash, a tower crowned in flame, and a golden ring spinning slowly in water. Symbols, perhaps, or signs. Far behind him, Dol Guldur smoked faintly in the dying light. It no longer pulsed with power, nor whispered with malice, but something ancient had been disturbed. A Maia, once of the west, now turned to shadow, had nearly risen in full. And if such a being could be forged anew by Sauron's hand, what other secrets waited in the deep places of the world? In Lothlorien, Galadriel stood once more on the green hill of Sarenrath, gazing across the silver leaves. Her thoughts wandered far, to the east, where evil brooded, and to the west, where her time was growing short. She had felt the ripple of the world change beneath her feet. The age was shifting. Soon, very soon, all would be tested. And though Dol Guldur had fallen quiet, the tale was not yet ended. The White Council had won a battle, yes, but the war for Middle-earth had only begun to stir. Like the beauties of Dol Guldur cooled under a gray sky, and Galadriel returned to Lothlorien to bind the wounds of the forest, Saruman the White rode south, his thoughts tangled like threads in a loom. He did not speak of the battle, nor linger to consult with the council. He rode swiftly and alone, and behind him drifted the smoke of a fortress half buried in ash and silence. Taruman's path turned not to the white towers of Elrond, nor to the shores where Caiodon dwelt, but to Isengard. His own stronghold stood ringed with stone and mountain, secret and secure, and within it the Tower of Orthon rose, black and gleaming beneath the shadow of the misty mountains. There, among his scrolls and tomes, he could unravel what he had seen. For though the council had driven Mormachar into the void, the battle had left something behind. An impression, a resonance in the air, like a chord still vibrating. Saruman had felt it keenly, and now, alone in the tower's highest chamber, he sought its source. He bent over ancient maps, some inked with elvish hands long vanished, others scrolled in black script that no one living dared read aloud. He stirred dust from pages that whispered when touched, and lit candles that hissed as if reluctant to burn. For days he worked without pause, searching not for the Maia himself, but for the design, the craft behind it. Mordor had not risen from spirit alone. His body had been forged, bound by ritual, shaped with precision. And in that, Sauron saw more than a threat. He saw a pattern, a power once hidden by the Valar, and now uncovered, or perhaps rediscovered, by Sauron in the depths of Middle-earth. It was knowledge the council would not understand, not even Gandalf, and certainly not Galadriel, with her eyes forever turned toward the light. But Saruman understood, and that understanding began to coil within him like a serpent. Far to the west, Gandalf rode to Rivendell, the golden leaves of autumn falling around him in slow, drifting spirals. The path was quiet, yet he remained uneasy. More than the battle at Dol Guldur lingered in his mind. It was Sauron. His silence, his hesitation in the final moments, and the way he had vanished without a word. In Elrond's house the fires burned warmly, and the air was scented with cedar and dried apples. The elves had begun to prepare for winter, yet Elrond's welcome was solemn, as though he too had sensed some shift in the winds of the world. When Gandalf spoke of what had transpired, the May reborn, the fortress broken, the light that had nearly failed, Elrond listened with eyes shadowed by memory. "There are whispers now from the east," Elrond said, pouring steaming tea into cups of thin silver. "The Easterlings have stirred earlier than usual. Orcs in the mountains move by moonlight. Even the Shire reports strange lights in the sky, though the hobbits dismiss them as stories told by old men at their firesides." Gandalf frowned. "Sauron presses in every direction. Testing, probing, or preparing," Eland replied quietly. "We wounded him, yes, but he is not idle. He seeks something." Gandalf was silent a moment, then leaned forward. "There is something else, Elrond. Saruman," he held back. Elrond looked up sharply. "Are you certain?" "I saw it," Gandalf said. In his eyes, he studied Mormachar like a craftsman studies another's work. Not with horror, but with calculation. And he waited. "Did you not see it in the chamber?" He could have struck. He chose not to. Eland was quiet for a long while, Then he nodded slowly. He has grown secretive of late, even to me. He no longer sends word to the Havens, and Curdon has not heard from him in over a season. He claims his studies require isolation, yet I wonder what knowledge he seeks. Power, Gandalf said, or perhaps mastery. They sat in silence as the fire crackled. Outside, the wind rose gently, tugging at the curtains. A raven landed on the windowsill and stared inside, unblinking. It croaked once, then flew away into the dusk. Meanwhile, in Lothlorien, Galadriel stood upon the shores of the Nimrodil, her bare hand trailing through the cool silver water. She had felt a tremor in the forest, faint and fleeting, like a breeze from distant mountains. Though Dol Guldur had fallen, its influence still clung to the roots and leaves like soot. The golden wood would hold for now, but she had seen it in the water's reflection. Dark sails on the Anduin, fires in Osgiliath, a mountain crowned with flame. The enemy would not wait long. He turned from the stream and returned to her Tallinn, where Galadriel awaited with tidings from the southern borders. Orc scouts had been spotted crossing the Ian Mool, and strange wolves had been seen hunting in pairs where once none dared enter. The land would not heal quickly, and neither would its people. But Galadriel's gaze turned eastward again to Mordor and beyond. In Isengard, Saruman descended from his tower, moving like a man walking among dreams. In the lower chambers, deep beneath the roots of Orthanc, he came to the vault where he kept the Palantir. He stood before it for a long time, his hand hovering just above its dark surface. Then, with a slow breath, he touched it. The stone flared to life, and for a moment, only a moment, his face reflected more than just fire. He did not flinch. And far away, across plains and mountains, in the dark land beyond the effluence, stirred. The days that followed passed quietly on the surface of the world, but beneath the calm, the wheels of shadow turned. In Rivendell, Gandalf walked the moonlit gardens alone, pausing now and then to listen to the wind through the pines. The sky above was clear, the stars sharp and cold. Yet the peace of that high valley brought him little rest. The silence in his mind had become too loud. He could feel it, that the enemy was moving again, not with noise or fire, but in whispers and secrets pressing into the corners of the world like smoke through a crack. He returned often to the library, poring over ancient accounts of the rings of power and the histories of the Maia who had fallen. The name Mormachar appeared nowhere, not even in the most obscure texts, but Gandalf found references to a Maia who had vanished in the deep First Age, one known for shaping, for working stone and fire, whose loyalty had been uncertain even in the early days of the world. Sauron had not forged him, but he had found him or found what was left of him and turned that ruin to a purpose. What troubled Gandalf most was not the strength of Mormachar, but the method. This forging of a new form, this gathering of spirit and substance. It had been carefully planned, constructed with a mind that understood both the limits and the liberties of the ancient law. It spoke of long study, of deep craft, and if Sauron could do it once, he could do it again. One morning, Elend brought him a letter written in a neat but hurried hand and bearing the seal of Gondor. It had come by swift rider through the gap of Rohan, and its bearer had not waited for a reply. "There's trouble in the south," Elrond said as Gandalf broke the seal. "From the Steward." The letter was brief but grim. Strange figures had been seen near the dead marshes, men in dark robes who did not speak, whose eyes glowed faintly by night. Gondor's rangers had tracked them as far as the edge of the Moranin, but none dared follow further.
One patrol had vanished entirely. Denethor, proud and sharp-minded, had written little else, but the implication was clear. Mordor stirred. Gandalf's brow furrowed as he read. This is no accident. These robed figures, they were scouts, or worse, messengers. Sauron tests the borders of Gondor again. Elrond nodded. He has long desired to reclaim the lands around the Black Gate. It would give him a hand stretched westward toward Osgiliath and Aelion, and toward the Ring. Gandalf added quietly. The thought came unbidden, but once spoken, it settled heavily between them. No one had seen the ring in over 2,000 years, not since Isildur had fallen at the Gladden Fields. Yet all who understood its nature knew it could not be lost forever. Sauron's strength was growing too swiftly. Something had changed. Something had moved in the great pattern of the world. Gandalf turned from Eland and crossed the chamber to a tall window that overlooked the valley below. He watched as two elven children played among the leaves, laughing beneath a maple tree that had just begun to turn. He remembered another time, long ago now, when peace had felt real. But that time had passed. The war they had forestalled at Dol Guldur had not ended. It had simply retreated, shifting its shape, waiting for a new moment to strike. He made his decision that same day. I must go, he said. Not south, not yet. I must return to the wild, to the borders. There is something out there beneath the hills and forests that we have overlooked, a thread we must follow. Elrond did not ask questions. Take what you need, he said, and go swiftly. Before dawn, Gandalf left Rivendell, riding a swift gray horse that the elves had bred in secret. He carried only a small pack, his staff and his pipe, though he used it less now. The road took him through the high pass where the stones gleamed with frost even in autumn, and down into the lands east of the misty mountains. He passed through old ruins, watchtowers long abandoned, stones bearing the carvings of dwarves long dead, and followed the river southward toward the Gladden Fields. It was here that Ilsdor had been struck down, and here that the ring had slipped into the Anduin's grasp. The land was soft and marshy, filled with tall reeds and pools that gleamed dully under a pale sun. At night, lights danced over the water, and faint voices echoed in the mist. Gandalf knew better than to follow them. For 3 days he searched the riverbanks, speaking to birds, listening to trees, watching the flow of the water. There was a weight in the earth here, as though memory had taken root and refused to die. On the 4th night, he met a stranger. The creature was small, hunched, and moved with a furtive grace, slipping through the reeds like a whisper. Its eyes gleamed pale in the moonlight, and it muttered to itself in a voice too low to catch. Gandalf stayed hidden, watching. The thing crept to the water's edge and peered into the depths, murmuring, "Where is it, precious? Where did they take it?" Gandalf's breath caught. It was Gollum. He had found him. Gandalf did not move. From behind a tangled knot of reeds and stone, he watched as the creature slunk along the edge of the marsh, creeping low with unnatural flexibility, muttering in a guttural rasp that barely carried above the gentle lap of water. Gollum's back was hunched, and his skin, pale and clammy as fish jelly, gleamed faintly in the moonlight. His long fingers, like the legs of some bent insect, scrabbled at the muddy shore as he hissed softly to the darkness. Terran, they took it. Yes, they did.
The thieves, Baggins. Filthy Baggins.
But where did he go? Gone. Gone into the west. Precious. No, not west. No fire there. No master there. The creature's voice was fractured and strange, and Gandalf felt both pity and unease rise within him. It was clear that this was no longer a simple, wicked thing. The ring had shaped it, twisted it, bound its soul to shadow and obsession. Yet Gollum's ramblings were not aimless. Buried within the mumbling were clues, words Gandalf strained to understand. He waited for hours, crouched in the reeds, until his legs ached and the cold of the marsh crept into his bones. Gollum continued to move in a circle, returning again and again to the same flat stone at the edge of the water. Once he plunged his hands into the pool and groped in the mud, then snarled and struck the water with a splash. It was clear that he sought something that was no longer there. When at last the creature curled into a heap beneath a bent willow and fell into a twitching, restless sleep, Gandalf stepped out from hiding. His staff tapped gently against the earth as he approached, and he took care not to move too quickly. He had faced dragons, brows, and wraiths, but there was something peculiarly dangerous about Gollum, not in strength, but in unpredictability. "Migo," he said softly. At once the creature sprang upright, baring sharp teeth, eyes wide with fear and hatred. "No! Go away! Go away, thief!"
"We knows what you wants, nasty wizard. Your own tricks us."
"No, no, not again." Gandalf did not lift his staff. His voice remained calm. "I know what you are and what you once were. I do not come to take from you, Smeagol. I come to listen." Gloom hissed and backed away into the mist, vanishing so quickly it was like watching smoke vanish in wind. But Gandalf was patient. He remained at the marsh's edge for 2 days, kindling no fire, setting no traps, merely speaking into the air when he knew Gollum was near. He spoke of rivers, of caves, of quiet things. He told tales in fragments, left food wrapped in leaves, and fish caught fresh. He waited. On the 3rd night, Gollum returned. The creature crept to the edge of the circle Gandalf had drawn and sat hunched like a child, picking at the damp grass with long fingernails.
"He tricked us," Gollum muttered. "He promised, yes, he did. Made us strong, precious. But then he burned us."
"Yes, burned and whipped and hunted us like dogses." "Who did?" asked Gandalf. "Deny him the master. We thought he wanted us, needed us. But no, no, no. He heard us, took us in chains. Precious made us scream. He wanted the Baggins. Yes, wanted to know where he'd gone." A chill passed through Gandalf at the words. He leaned forward slightly. "Did you tell him?" Gollum whimpered and twisted his hands. "We said nothing. No, not really. Not the whole, never the whole. But he knew. He always knew. The mountains, the forest, the little place with fat men and pipe smoke. He knew. Oh yes, we escaped. Clever Smeagol. Slipped through the cracks. We did, before the fire came again. And breath was slow." "So Sauron knows of the Shire?" Gollum nodded rapidly, then began to mutter and rock back and forth. "He sees it now. Sees the green hills, the river, the party tree, all of it. All of it. But he can't reach it yet. No legs. No legs to walk, just spies.
Flying things, crawling things. But they'll find it. They will. We must find it first. Precious must find it before they do. Gandalf sat back in silence, the weight of Gollum's words sinking deep into his heart. Sauron had tortured this wretched being, gleaned what knowledge he could, and had now set his eyes upon the west. If the ring was truly in the Shire, and Gandalf had long suspected that it was, then time had grown shorter than he feared. He spent another day speaking with Gollum, drawing from him what scraps of memory he could, piecing together the creature's path since his escape. Gollum had wandered far, through mountain passes and forests dark, hunted by orcs and worse. He had followed rivers, slept in caves, and once for a time had lurked near the borders of Mordor itself, listening to the language of the Black Gate. From all this, Gandalf confirmed what he had feared. The ring had stirred, and the enemy was seeking it in earnest. When Gandalf left the Gladden Fields, he did so with a grim resolve. He did not take Gollum with him, not yet. The creature was too wild, too dangerous to bring into the open. But he left word with the rangers of the north to watch for him, to bring him safely if found. Then he turned his horse toward the west once more, and rode harder than he had in many years. The Shire must be warned, but before that, he would stop once more in Lothlorien. Galadriel had to hear what he had learned, and if the ring was indeed in the hands of Bilbo Baggins, or worse, had passed to another, then the fate of all Middle-earth balanced on a perilous edge. And far away, in the towers of Barad-dûr, the eye turned, sweeping the plains of the east, pausing now and again on the green lands beyond the mountains. The search had begun. In the heart of Lothlorien, beneath the golden canopy of mallow trees, Galadriel stood once more at the mirror. The basin sat nestled in its glade, filled not with water, but with moonlight and memory, shimmering as if the stars themselves had been gathered in a silver bowl. She gazed into it with steady eyes, her long fingers resting on the stone rim, her breath quiet. The wind was hushed around her as though the forest itself listened. She had seen many visions in the mirror, some distant, some near, some never meant to be, but in recent days the images had grown darker. Shadows crept along the borders of her land, not in the form of marching armies, but as whispers in the roots and mist on the river. Orcs moved at night along the outer trees. Wolves hunted in pairs, always silent, never straying far from the eastern banks of the Anduin. Something was stirring once more in the hills beyond, something she had thought vanished. But it was not until she saw the gray figure riding through the eaves of her forest that she allowed herself to hope. Gandalf came swiftly, though his steed was tired and streaked with sweat. He was travel-worn, his cloak marked with brambles and mud, his hat missing, but his eyes were bright with purpose, and the message in them was plain even before he spoke a word. They met in her talon at twilight. The light that filtered through the golden leaves cast warm shapes on the pale wood floor. But Galadriel did not sit. She stood tall and still, hands clasped before her, her voice calm. "You have seen him?" Gandalf nodded, accepting the cup of clear water she offered, but barely sipping it. "I found him in the Gladden marshes. Just as I feared, he escaped Mordor, barely, and now creeps across the land like a creature hunted by both light and darkness. And the enemy," Galadriel's voice remained even, though her gaze sharpened. "And snows of the Shire," Gandalf said. "He drew it from Gollum, not by wit, but by pain. Not the name, perhaps, not the precise location, but enough. Baggins and Shire, That was all he needed. Galadriel turned from him, her eyes tracing the soft patterns of sunlight on the far wall. For a moment she said nothing. Then she spoke again, slowly. "He will send his servants, not armies." "Yes," said Gandalf. "The 9 will ride. I do not know when, but soon. And the ring, if it is still in the hands of Bilbo Baggins, it must be moved or guarded or destroyed." His voice dropped as he spoke that last word, for even saying it aloud seemed to disturb the stillness of the Talon. Galadriel returned to the center of the room, where her white cloak rustled like silk over leaves. If it is truly the One Ring, then it cannot remain in the Shire. But it cannot be wielded either, not by elf, nor wizard, nor man. "I do not seek to wield it," Gandalf said, setting the cup aside. "I seek only to keep it from the Dark Lord, and for that I must learn more. There is an unease in my mind. The events of Dol Guldur, the Maia we faced, Mormachar, they were not isolated. They were part of something greater. A long design stretching through time like a spider's web. Sauron is building something." Galadriel's voice lowered, not with fear, but with a terrible certainty. "The second darkness comes. The ring is the key, and we have held the lock sealed by chance alone. That chance is ending." She turned then to a pale wooden shelf lined with ancient scrolls. From it she took a single parchment bound with silver ribbon. "This came to me from the Havens 3 months ago. Kiardan's messengers spoke of changes in the sea, currents that do not belong, stars dimming in the western sky, and more. A storm seen in the south, black sails on the coast near Ombar, though no ships were found afterward. I did not believe it then. I do now." Gandalf unrolled the scroll and scanned the words. They were sparse but clear. Strange tides, sudden storms, and distant sightings of things long thought vanished from the world. Though no one dared say it, all signs pointed to one conclusion. The world itself was reacting to the ring stirring. "I must go to the Shire," he said. "There is no more time for wondering." Bilbo was no longer the same hobbit who found the ring. And if it is passed to another, if Frodo carries it now, he must be warned. The riders will come. Galadriel looked at him, her expression unreadable for a long moment. Then she said softly, "When the time comes, and the choice must be made, remember this. The smallest light may outlast the longest shadow, but even light must choose to shine." Gandalf nodded at once, his weariness momentarily forgotten. "Thank you, my lady, for your wisdom and your watchfulness." Before he left, Galadriel walked with him to the borders of the Golden Wood. The path was dappled with gold and green, and the mallow leaves stirred in a wind that smelled of distant rain. At the river's edge, she handed him a bundle wrapped in white cloth. "Food for the road," she said, "and a draught of memory. Should darkness fall upon you, it will help you remember who you are." Gandalf looked down at the bundle, then up into her face, and for a moment the burden he bore seemed lighter. "I will not forget." He rode north that very day, bound for the Shire, and Galadriel returned to her mirror. That night the water showed her a sky split by black wings, a sword of flame, and a ring spinning slowly in a child's palm. She did not sleep. The Shire was green and golden, just as it always had been. Rolling hills speckled with sheep and laced with hedgerows stretched beneath a pale blue sky. Trees wore their late summer leaves proudly, and the air smelled of applewood, pipe smoke, and turned earth. Children laughed along the banks of the water, fishing with crooked rods and sunburnt noses, while their elders strolled the lanes with baskets full of late raspberries and loaves still warm from the oven. There was no hint in the rustling leaves or the lazy curling of chimney smoke that anything beyond their borders stirred. But Gandalf felt it. He had crossed the Brandywine at dawn and taken the road westward through stock and by water, his cloak gray and weathered, his horse picking its way along the well-trodden lanes. As he rode, he nodded to familiar faces, hobbits who offered cheerful waves or wide-eyed glances before ducking behind hedges to whisper. It had been some years since the wizard had last passed this way, and tales of his fireworks lingered longer than any real memory. But the Shire had not changed, at least not on the surface. Bag End rose above Hobbiton like a round green crown, its garden perfectly trimmed, its door still painted a bright and polished green. Gandalf dismounted slowly, stretched his back, and stood for a long moment before the hill, remembering Bilbo's birthday had come and gone, though Gandalf had not attended. The journey to Dol Guldur and what followed had held him too long. Now he was late, and more than just for tea. He raised his staff and knocked 3 times. The door opened to reveal Frodo Baggins, looking not unlike Bilbo once had, well-fed, brighted, and just a bit too curious for a hobbit. But Gandalf saw at once that the years had changed him. Frodo's face had the softness of youth, but his eyes, blue and steady, held something older than his years. Gandalf. Frodo's face lit up, and he stepped aside at once. "You're back! Bilbo said you'd come eventually, but we weren't sure when. He's in the study. Come in, come in." The wizard ducked through the round doorway and stepped into the warm, well-kept comfort of Bag End. It smelled of ink and toast with the faintest undertone of pipe smoke and lavender. A fire crackled in the hearth, though the morning was mild. Books were stacked in tidy heaps, maps and letters scattered on the desk. Gandalf removed his cloak, nodded in thanks as Frodo took it, and made his way down the short hall. Bilbo sat in his usual chair, a red blanket tucked over his knees, spectacles perched on the end of his nose. A half-written letter rested beside his teacup. He looked up as Gandalf entered and smiled broadly. "There you are," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten us." "Not forgotten," Gandalf replied, settling into the chair across from him. "Only delayed." "There's been trouble in the east." Bilbo's smile faded slightly. "That's what I feared. I felt it, too. You know, not in the sky or the wind, just a feeling, a sort of prickling in the back of the mind, like someone's watching from far away." Gandalf nodded, then glanced down the hall where Frodo had disappeared. "Does he know?" said Bilbo, sighing. "Not all. He knows I've been acting strange. I tell him, it's the Turkish blood, but it's the ring, Gandalf. I've kept it hidden all these years, but it's getting heavier." Gandalf leaned forward. "I must see it." Bilbo hesitated, his fingers twitching on the edge of the chair. Then, with a reluctant nod, he stood close to the drawer in his writing desk and opened it slowly. From within, he drew a small leather pouch and placed it on the table. It made no sound as it landed, no clink, no thump, yet Gandalf felt the shift in the air at once. He opened the pouch and tipped the contents into his palm. The ring slid out smoothly,
catching the firelight with a dull, sullen gleam. It looked small and plain, no more than a wedding band. But the moment it touched his skin, Gandalf felt the weight of it, cold, ancient, and watching. He did not try to wear it. Instead, he turned it over carefully, noting the perfect smoothness of its shape, the absence of marks. But as the firelight danced across it, faint letters began to appear, crimson like fresh scars. "All ring to rule them all," he murmured. Bilbo sat very still. "It speaks sometimes. When I sleep, I dream of towers and fire. Sometimes I dream I'm being chased, always by something with no face." "You must let it go, Bilbo," Gandalf said gently, closing the pouch. "You must give it to Frodo. It cannot stay with you." Bilbo stiffened. "I've kept it safe." "I know, but now it's no longer safe to keep. The enemy knows your name. He knows about the ring. He will send his servants to find it soon." There was a long silence. Then Bilbo nodded slowly. "You will help him?" Gandalf smiled, but there was sorrow in his eyes. "I will help him all I can." Frodo returned shortly with a tray of tea, and the rest of the morning passed with ordinary things. Talk of harvests, of mushrooms, of stories half-written and letters never sent. But the shadow lingered in the corners of the room, and as the sun dipped lower, Gandalf stood once more. "I must ride again," he said, "to seek counsel and prepare. Keep the ring hidden, Frodo. Tell no one, not even your friends. I will send word soon." Frodo watched him go, standing in the round doorway, the breeze stirring his dark curls. He did not understand yet, not fully, but the world had begun to change around him, and he felt it. In the fading light, as Gandalf rode toward Bree, black shapes stirred far to the south, their forms cloaked, and their eyes empty of all but hunger. They were already on the move. The wind that swept across the plains of Mordor was hot and dry, rising from scorched stone and sulphurous earth. It carried with it the scent of ash and something fouler, still old blood perhaps, or the breath of something buried too long. Deep within the Tower of Barando, behind walls of black iron and battlements carved in fire, the Dark Lord stirred. He had no face to speak of, no form like that of men, but his will was a presence, a pressure felt in every shadow cast by his tower. And now his gaze had turned west. 9 steeds waited at the gate, great black beasts with eyes like dull embers and hooves that smoked when they struck stone. Their riders sat motionless, shrouded in cloaks that defied wind and sun, their forms more shadow than flesh. The Nazgûl had waited long in silence, bound to their master's will, but the call had come at last. A name, a place, Baggins Shire. That was enough. Without word or signal, the 9 turned and rode from the gate, vanishing into the dark beyond the mountains. The world did not tremble at their passing, but it would soon. Far away, across leagues of forest and plain, Galadriel stood upon the highest terrace of Caras Galadon. The sky above was pale, tinged with the first blush of autumn, but her eyes were turned eastward. She had stood there each night since Gandalf's departure, reading the stars and the patterns of wind through the mealer leaves. Each evening the light seemed dimmer. The birds sang less. Something was wrong in the flow of the world, something not yet fully seen. A soft tread behind her drew her attention.
Celeborn approached, his silver hair bound back, his face composed as always, though concern traced the corners of his eyes.
In his hand, he carried a folded letter from the Northern Scouts, he said, offering it to her. She took it and read quickly. It spoke of riders in the eastern woods, tall figures, cloaked and silent, glimpsed only at night. No tracks were found, no voices heard. One of the watch wardens had fallen ill after encountering one at a distance, though no wound marked her.
She would not speak now, only we. Galadriel closed the letter, the 9 ride. Celeborn said nothing for a time, then asked, "Do you believe the ring has awakened them fully?"
"No,"
Galadriel replied softly. "But it draws them, like a moth to flame or a hound to blood. Their master knows now where to search. His whispers ride the wind. The ring cannot remain hidden much longer." She turned, the breeze catching the edge of her cloak. "Summon the captains. The forest must be guarded on all borders. I will speak to the mirror again tonight." Even as she spoke, fires were kindled in the east. From Minas Morgul, a host began to muster. Small at first, scattered, but soon to swell. Orcs, men of the south, beasts bred in darkness. All had heard the same call, felt the same surge in the marrow of their bones. The eye was awake, and it was hungry. In Bree, Gandalf arrived as dusk painted the rooftops with amber. The town was bustling more than usual, with travelers from the east and south, traders with anxious faces, and rangers slipping in and out of sight with little more than nods and glances. The prancing pony was noisy, but when Gandalf stepped through the door, the noise dipped, only for a moment, but enough to mark his arrival. Butterb greeted him with a flurry of bows and half-finished sentences, already nervous before the wizard spoke. Gandalf asked only for a room, a fire, and news from the road. Over pipe smoke and a simple meal, he listened to a dozen halfs stories. Strange men camping near the greenway, animals vanishing from farms, a pale rider seen on the east road who neither slept nor spoke. That night he met with Strider in the woods beyond the town. Aragorn had been watching the borders, and his expression was grim. "The Nazgûl have passed through the wild," he said. "I saw one myself 2 nights past near Sarn Ford. They move by night and leave no tracks. They ask questions, always the same, shy Baggins." "They are seeking Frodo," Gandalf murmured. "And the ring must leave," said Aragorn. "Now he and those with him. They must not stay one day longer in the Shire." "I agree, but I had hoped for more time," Gandalf sighed, rubbing a hand across his brow. "I should never have left him, but I had to be sure. Now it is clear Sauron has loosed his hounds." They spoke until the moon stood high, then parted with few words. Aragorn returned to the wild to watch the roads, and Gandalf rode hard back toward the Shire. But even then, the 9 had entered its borders. They came in silence like wind through dry grass, moving by shadow and starlight. Hobbits spoke of black shapes at the edge of their fields, of cold dreams and sudden chills, of cattle disappearing and dogs howling at nothing. No one had seen the riders clearly, but the fear they left behind lingered in every shadow, and one by one they closed the circle. In Lothlorien, Galadriel stood once more before the mirror. The water showed her a fire flickering in a round hobbit hole, a hand grasping a golden ring, and 9 dark shapes crossing a quiet bridge. She saw a flash of blue light, a sword raised, and a figure standing at the edge of a river, defiant but afraid. And beyond it all, the Eye. She closed the vision, though it still burned behind her eyes. "The world has changed," she whispered. "The War of the Ring has begun." The roads of Middle-earth seemed to stretch endlessly beneath a sky heavy with darkening clouds. The wind carried with it whispers of war and the faintest scent of smoke, as if the land itself braced against an unseen storm. Gandalf rode with quiet purpose, his cloak pulled close about him, eyes sharp despite the weariness that lay beneath. His thoughts were a tempest of worries and hope, all tangled with the knowledge that the fate of countless lives rested upon the coming days. Far ahead, beyond rolling hills and thick forests, the quiet green of the Shire awaited, fragile and unknowing. In Lothlorien, Galadriel stood once more on the balcony of Saruman, the golden mallow leaves glowing faintly beneath the waning light. Her gaze was fixed eastward toward the shadowed lands, where the fires of Mordor smoldered like a dying heart. The mirror resting in its hidden glade had shown her the shape of things to come, the flight of riders cloaked in darkness, the trembling of a small hand gripping a golden ring, and the distant figure standing resolute upon the edge of a river. "Tune," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. "The threads of fate will be drawn tight. Their paths, though separated by leagues of land and the turning of the sun, were destined to converge." Gandalf arrived at the borders of the Shire under the cloak of night, the stars shimmering faintly above as if offering a silent blessing. The hills were peaceful, their gentle slopes dappled with moonlight, but the peace was brittle. As he passed beneath familiar hedge and silent trees, the weight of what was to come pressed upon him like a stone in his heart. Within Baggins, Frodo sat quietly, the ring hidden deep within his pocket, its presence a dull ache that never ceased. Gandalf entered softly, his eyes meeting Frodo's with a mixture of warmth and urgency. "The time has come," he said simply. "We must move quickly, for the shadows grow longer, and the enemy draws near." Frodo nodded, a courage born of necessity stirring within him. Together they prepared to leave, knowing that their journey would take them far from the comforts of home into a world where darkness sought to claim all. Meanwhile, Galadriel gathered her people in the golden halls of Lothlorien, her voice steady as she spoke of the coming storm. Elven archers readied their bows, sentinels took up watch along the forest borders, and the air thrummed with a mixture of anticipation and resolve. Though the shadows stretched long, the light of the golden wood would not be extinguished without a fight. As the dawn broke over the eastern hills, Gandalf and Frodo rode toward Bree, shadows falling behind them like silent companions. Unseen, the Nazgûl prowled just beyond the edges of the road, their cold eyes searching, ever watchful. Yet in the hearts of the small band that would soon gather, a spark of hope remained unyielding. Galadriel stood once more before the mirror, her hands raised in a silent invocation. The waters rippled, revealing fleeting images of courage and sacrifice, friendship and loss, and the fragile thread upon which the fate of Middle-earth hung. She closed her eyes, feeling the burden and the promise intertwine, knowing that whatever the future held, the smallest light might yet outlast the longest shadow. And so, with hearts intertwined by duty and hope, Gandalf and Galadriel faced the dawn of a new age, one where the courage of the few might hold the fate of all.